can't wrap my head around it. You cannot make peace with the Jews. In the Quran, you gotta kill the Jews. They hate Jews just as much as the next person. So we had an army that failed on October 7th. Welcome back from tech to tanks. Well, before we talk about Australia, it's just worth mentioning that the Iran-US nuclear discussions have basically crashed. Iran rejected the deal. Trump and Bibi had a very interesting, mysterious conversation that was not scheduled, and then Bibi just convened the entire security, personnel of Israel, from the, obviously defense minister, head of Shabak, head of Mossad. They all came into a meeting, which again, very unusual. So something tells me that something is heating up as far as Iran is concerned. Of course, I don't have any intel, I'm not sharing any information. I'm just saying it seems to me that something is happening. So we'll see with that. But you may or may not have heard that I was banned from Australia for 3 years. Someone sent me a tweet of some random small Twitter account that was calling to people to report Hillel Fuld, who's coming to Australia, because Hillel is a Zionist and Islamophobe, etc., etc., etc. Obviously ridiculousness. I didn't make much of it because it was a very tiny account and everyone told me not to worry. Friday morning, I'm getting a haircut, like my haircut, and I get an email from the Australian government. And I'm like, why is the Australian government emailing me? And I opened it and my visa was revoked. I had to read that email like 5 times because I did not believe, and I still cannot believe, that the Australian government is revoking the visa of a random American Jew. That's important to mention because I applied for my visa on my American passport. The fact that they revoked my visa is absurd. As soon as I digested it after reading the email 5 times, I immediately sprung into action. I emailed our friend, Ambassador Huckabee, because again, American citizen, American Jew being banned from Australia. He was the first person that I emailed. And then I went to Israel's foreign minister. I went to Israel's former ambassador to the UN, and on and on and on. Got the Australian ambassador involved, and it really went up the diplomatic level to the highest levels, and it's continuing to do so. So I've been working, I'd say, 3 channels. First of all, I obviously appealed immediately. I did not go to the press on Friday. I was hoping, it would be solved behind the scenes, under the radar. And so I did not go to the press. I spoke to a few journalists and told them to not report it. And then I went diplomatic. After I signed back on from Shabbat, it was all over the place. When I say all over the place, I'm talking easily 50 articles in any and every single publication you can imagine, from Haaretz to Sky News Australia, and many Times of Israel, of course, but many American and specifically Australian publications. The response from the Jewish community has been overwhelmingly positive, loving, supportive, and it's been beautiful. This morning, I got an email from the Australian government asking me for more information about the intention of my trip, why I was coming. And I was coming, by the way, to speak at 2 events, one in Melbourne, one in Sydney, for Magen David Adom, which you may or may not be familiar with. It's basically the Israeli Red Cross. It's a first responders emergency organization. I can't think of something less inflammatory than that. And so they asked me what my intention was, coming to Australia, and if I could send evidence or proof that I am an American and an Israeli citizen. Of course, I responded immediately, told them the purpose of my trip, sent them the flyers to the events, and sent them a picture of my US and my Israeli passport. That was about 4 hours ago. Let's not forget that Australia is way ahead of Israel, so I'm waiting to hear back. Either way, though, my flight was supposed to be in a couple of hours, and obviously I'm just not going to Australia at this point, not only because of just logistics and babysitter and all that jazz, but also because I'm not sure that I feel safe in a country that just banned an American Jew from entering. So, that's not going to happen. I'm not going on this trip, but again, it's a 3-year ban. So I do hope it's lifted. Not to say that I'm necessarily eager to go to Australia after this, but either way, the fact that, again, a random, not politician, a random guy expressing his opinions on Israel, his pro-Israel opinions, is banned from Australia. I mean, I put it on my Twitter bio. I said, banned from Australia, banned from a continent. It's absurd. And what kind of precedent does that set for future people trying to come to Australia? Anybody who has an opinion the government does not agree with won't be allowed into the country. It's obviously insanity. And the Australian government, literally at the highest levels, the opposition, has turned this into an agenda item. It's become it's become a worldwide diplomatic crisis between Israel and Australia, American Australia. It's just blown up. And it got, easily 50 articles in terms of media. Haaretz covered it, which of course, they never surprise me. Haaretz, how do you even possibly spin this to make it my fault. And of course they did. They took a tweet of mine that I said, radical Islam is a global plague. And I'm very careful when I speak about Islam to say radical Islam, very careful. Of course, they misquoted me and said, Fuld said Islam is a global plague. Of course they did. One of the tweets that the Australian government quoted in the document was that I said that there was no massacre last week in the humanitarian zone in Gaza. And I denied that, said it's fake news. Of course, now we know that it was indeed fake news, and all of the media and the journalists who reported it have retracted their statements. So there indeed was no massacre. So my tweet was, of course, accurate. But that was just one of them. I talked about what percentage of Muslims worldwide are radicalized. And I wrote in my tweet, I'm being conservative when I say 10 to 15%. It's more like 15 to 20% based on Pentagon data. I talked about that. I talked about the misconception that everyone in Gaza is innocent except for Hamas, which is, of course, utterly ridiculous, given that we had thousands of Gazans marching into Israel, not Hamas terrorists, just regular Gazans marching into Israel on October 7th, murdering, raping, kidnapping. That's regular Gazans. Of course, we saw regular Gazans as the hostages were being dragged into Gaza, spitting at the hostages, hitting the hostages. Of course, we have the fact that Gaza elected Hamas. Of course, we have the polls that the vast majority of Gaza supports 10-7. We're talking about a society that is deeply, deeply indoctrinated. Let's not forget the horrible sight of the hostages being released and how thousands of Gazans were basically trying to lynch them and had to be stopped by Hamas. Just wrap your head around that. The regular Gazans who were trying to lynch hostages as they're being released from captivity had to be stopped by Hamas. So this whole narrative that there's Hamas and then there's the rest of Gaza that's innocent is a dangerous lie. And so I addressed that in my tweet. Again, being very careful with what I say. And I said, there are, of course, innocent people in Gaza, but to push that narrative that everyone in Gaza is innocent because if they're kids, they must be innocent, when in reality, again, we've seen, like my brother, people who were attacked, murdered, and worse by kids in Gaza. So just because someone's a kid and just because someone has a press jacket on does not make them innocent, unfortunately. And it's a tragic thing to say. I would love nothing more than to say all kids are innocent. Unfortunately, we know the reality, and I'll tell you something, it's not the kids' fault. It's the fact that the education system in Gaza and in general in the Palestinian world, is deeply indoctrinating, and it teaches these kids from age 0 that killing a Jew is the utmost accomplishment in life. And so you can't blame the kids, but the reality is, as I wrote in the tweet, it is not an accurate assessment to say that everyone in Gaza who's under a certain age or is a so-called journalist is necessarily innocent. Those were just some of the examples that the Australian government quoted in this document. They sent me a pretty serious document quoting my tweets, which, again, forget for 1 second the actual content. Just, I can't wrap my head around this. Honestly, it's been like, what are we, Tuesday? It's been a couple of days. And again, it's been all over the place, but I actually still can't wrap my head around this. The Australian government is sending a random person, call me whatever you want to call me, an influencer, I'm an American Jew, an American Israeli Jew. The Australian government banning an American Israeli Jew because of his opinions on Israel, which are all accurate, which are not emotional, which are not inflammatory, which are factual, from entering the country for 3 years because of my opinions. It's honestly hard to believe. And again, it's a slippery slope. Where does this end, right? And again, in the past, they banned Ayelet Shaked, who I've spoken to and who's a talented politician, but she's a politician. Not to say that that's justified, but she's a politician. Maybe I can understand that. But I'm just a random guy. Why are they banning me from Australia? So I would imagine, the fact that they did this right before Shabbat, knowing that I'd sign off, knowing that no one's in the office there, because again, Australia's ahead of us, and then I have Shabbat, so I'm offline, they're offline, and then it's a holiday in Australia. So if you think that the timing of this email that I got was coincidental, then you're kidding yourself. It was very well timed, knowing that I cannot do anything until my flight was supposed to take off in a couple of hours. So, I appealed right away and the media started basically right away, but the Australian officials didn't see the media storm. I don't expect them to reverse it. They might reverse it, in which case I'm still not going on this trip. But again, it's a 3-year thing. So in the future, I might not, given the anti-Semitic nature clearly the anti-Semitic nature of the government. So I don't know that I'm ever going to want to go there. But again, I would like this to be reversed because it's a dangerous, dangerous statement by a government to ban anyone because of their opinions. So that's what's been going on. I've had easily 30 interviews with the press, from Sky News to many, many others. After this, I'm going to do 2 more interviews. It's all over the place. And like I said, it's become quite a diplomatic event, which I can't help but laugh. It's just a ridiculous thing. So we'll see what happens. That's been my past couple of days. As far as geopolitics is concerned, like I said, things are heating up with Iran. Hamas in Gaza is basically, I don't want to jinx it, but they're basically done. Unfortunately, we did lose 8 soldiers because of booby-trapped structures in Gaza, which begs the question, why are we still going into structures and why are we not bombing them from the air? Which is, of course, the reason that when people accuse us of ethnic cleansing and of genocide, it is utterly ridiculous. Because if we were committing genocide, why are we not bombing from the air? Why are we sending soldiers in? Again, just one example of how ridiculous their whole narrative is. But unfortunately, the IDF sent in drones and many other things to ensure that those buildings, those structures were indeed not booby-trapped. And unfortunately, when these soldiers went in, the entire structure blew up and collapsed on them, and we lost 8 soldiers. It's absolutely terrible. But the reality is, in Gaza, most soldiers that I speak to never even see a Hamas terrorist, because some of them are just hiding underground like rats. But I think it's safe to say, and I don't want to jinx anything, but I think it's safe to say that Hamas is basically militarily, diplomatically, and politically dead. Of course, we still need to end it, but they're gone. The big question, of course, is what's going to be with the hostages? How are we going to get them out? Nobody has any answers to that question, but all I can say is that I strongly agree with the policy of the Israeli government that diplomacy doesn't work with a genocidal terrorist organization like Hamas, and all we can do is apply military pressure, and that is the only language they understand, and that is exactly what we've been doing. We've taken off the gloves. We are, making them pay, and then there's, of course, the craziness with the Houthis who continue to just, I don't know what they're thinking. I'll say it again. I've said it 1,000 times, and I'll say it again. The fact that Israel is fighting a war on 7 fronts and winning is miracles of biblical proportions, and not even to mention the PR war. That's a whole different discussion. But just think about what Israel's doing. We're fighting Gaza, Judea and Samaria, Syria, there's discussions there, Iran, of course, Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon. 7 fronts. What kind of army could fight 7 fronts and win? It's wild. This is historic stuff. We still need to win the war. We still need to get our hostages back. But, as far as the war is concerned, by any metric you want to use, Israel is not only winning, Israel is obliterating its enemies. Hopefully the war ends soon when we defeat Hamas and we get our hostages back. Hopefully sooner than later. So the question from the audience was, I speak often about immigrating to Israel, about Aliyah, making Aliyah, moving to Israel. And the question was, how do these recent events, whether it's in Australia or the UK or Canada, change my call to action, for lack of a better term? The answer is it just strengthens it. Because on the list of justifications, let's call it, for Jews not to come home to Israel, one of them is, we're very comfortable here. We're very comfortable in America. This is just hard to believe. One of the places that I would say is the center of Jewry, one of the centers of Jewry in the New York tri-state area is, of course, the 5 towns, Woodmere, Lawrence, Cedarhurst, and I don't know the other 2, by the way. Even there, I think 3 anti-Semitic attacks, events, middle of the night. And so my friends in the 5 towns would say, yeah, it doesn't affect us. Here, it's safe. Well, you are no longer safe. So, on the long list of reasons, justifications for a Jew not to come back to Israel, you can now mark off, we're safe and comfortable here, because they are no longer safe and comfortable there. And then there's the whole, we have to lower my quality of life coming to Israel. Take that off the list. Oh, I don't know Hebrew. Take that off the list. I have to lower my salary. Take that off the list. Basically, on the list of justifications to not come to Israel, I would say 98% of them are basically gone. It's true that there are some sacrifices. It's of course true that there's, it's a different culture, and you might experience culture shock when coming to Israel. But there really is no excuse anymore for an American Jew not to come home, or at the very least, not to have an exit strategy, an exit plan of when we get to the point of no return, which I don't know what that is, because it seems to me we are at the point of no return. I mean, you had Jews literally lit on fire in the streets of America last week. So I don't know what the point of no return is. It seems to me that anti-Semites in Congress, Jews being harassed, not being allowed to walk around in academic institutions, Kanye West putting out a song called Heil Hitler, Jews being burned in the streets in Boulder. It seems to me that we've reached the point of no return, but I don't know what my friends in the States consider a point of no return, but either way, they should have an exit strategy, because things are not going to get better. The genie's not going back in the bottle. Anti-Semitism is just going to get worse, and it's going to get worse fast. And how do I know this? Because I know history. Open a history book. So, this just strengthens my point that Jews need to get out and come home sooner than later. The next question is, but United States is obviously negotiating with Iran, and the world is telling us to negotiate with Hamas. And so the question is, can you even negotiate with Muslims, with Arabs, whatever you want to call it? The answer is, if someone's a religious Muslim and understands and believes in the Quran, the answer is hard no. Because Muhammad on his deathbed, literally the last thing that he said is kill Jews. It is so, I would say, killing Jews is as core to Islam as Zionism or Zion is to Judaism. It's core. And so if you're a religious Muslim who believes in the Quran, you cannot make peace with the Jews because it's in the Quran, you got to kill the Jews. So, they play some games, and, this dude, Jolani, whatever his name is in Syria, puts on a tie and pretends he's a diplomat, and the world falls for it. But the reality is there's never going to be a two-state solution. There's never going to be a Palestinian state because they don't want a Palestinian state. They say it loud and clear. They want dead Jews. They want all of Israel from the river to the sea. That is what their charter says from 1964. They want all of Israel. They don't want to liberate anything because they launched the Palestinian Liberation Organization before there was any quote-unquote occupation. What do they want to liberate? The entire Israel. So there's no negotiating with someone who doesn't believe you have a right to exist. So, as a blanket statement, the answer is, can you negotiate with the Arab world? With few exceptions, of course, Jordan, Egypt, the UAE, we have seen precedent of Israel normalizing relations. This is just their opinion. I can't deny or confirm that. It's one thing to make peace at the governmental level, but if you walk around in Jordan, you walk around in Egypt, and you interview the people on the street, they hate Jews just as much as the next person. So I do not believe that there's any real way, effective way of negotiating with the Muslim world. So the next question is, are there any other options for diaspora Jews? And the answer is, it depends if you're asking in the short term or the long term. In the short term, go live in Boca Raton, go live in Florida. It's great there. I mean, the governor loves us and it's safe there. There's barely any anti-Semitism, although there were 50 shuls that received bomb threats a while ago. But generally speaking, I'd say Florida is pretty safe. So in the short term, sure, go move to Florida. In the long term, we know what's going to happen there because it happened in every other state. So in the long term, no, there is no other place for Jews. Jews need to come home. And yes, there are many questions. Oh, you had October 7th. Yes, we did. We had an army that failed on October 7th, but we still have an army. We have an army dedicated to mine and your protection and your safety. Who's protecting you there? No one. We see these people carrying terror flags in the streets of New York and every major city screaming Intifada now, globalize the Intifada, and literally, where are the Jews? This is mind-boggling stuff. And the cops just stand there on the side and they arrest people that oppose those people. It's just, you can't make this stuff up. So America and England and Canada, South Africa, Australia are not safe for Jews in the long term. And so again, Jews need to start thinking in that direction. No one's saying you need to pick up and leave right now. I get it. You have elderly parents, you have kids who have special needs, you have reasons you need to stay there. Fine, legitimate. But at least think long term. Have an exit strategy. If you can afford to, maybe buy an apartment in Israel so that you're ready when the time comes. But to answer the question, there is no safe place for Jews long term other than the state of Israel, our eternal homeland. Thank you. See you next week.